7th, 2018. As a reminder to my colleagues, please silence your phones and electronic devices. First on the agenda for administrative matters, Mrs. Linetti has something she needs to discuss and get a consensus from us on how we want to move forward with this.
Just very quickly, your grievance procedure for employee discipline cases allows you either to hear the case yourself if it comes up or send to a hearing officer. I have about 5 or 6 of these cases coming through. I'd like to ask your permission just to go ahead and sign them to hearing officers. What normally happens is the hearing officer then holds the hearing, there's transcripts, and a report comes to the hearing officer, and that's what you get to read. Otherwise, you're going to have to hold all these cases yourself, and I don't believe you have sufficient enough time the next month or so to do that. So I'd just like permission to go ahead and assign these cases to hearing officers.
Okay, do we have a consensus to move forward with this? Is there any objection? Okay, it looks like we have consensus to move forward. Thank you. Would anyone else like to give an update on any school-related events or activities that you've participated in recently?
Yes.
All right, we'll start with Mrs. Felton.
I just have to say I was happy to join in the African American Heritage High School's Colescott Bowl that was held at Norview High School. Mr. Yates was there presented, and we were represented by Green Run Collegiate, and they did exceptionally well. It was in the format of Jeopardy, and they had different categories such as art, business, military, journalism, politics, and this is the year. And it was dealing with history. And it was really a great performance put on by our Green Run Collegiate School, high school students. And I will have more on that. But I just want to let you know that we went to that, and it was really good. It was held at Norview on Saturday. Thank you.
Ms. Melnick?
I don't want to say too much because I know this is going to be part of your presentation tonight, but I just wanted to thank everyone who participated, helped out, donated in our beach bag program. We just had our most successful food drive ever, and I'll let Dr. Spence explain the details later, but I'm really proud to be a part of that program. Jody and Debbie, Lisa, Amber, they worked tirelessly for that, and it was great. Thank you.
Any other Ms. Weems?
Yes, I was a Salem Sun Devil yesterday and today for every single block, so I'm exhausted. And I was late both days, too.
No.
So I told the students, I feel your pain. But anyway, so they were, it was a compassion. They were learning about compassion and nonprofits, and so there were 3 of us that spoke every hour about our nonprofits. But anyway, beforehand, just of interest of my colleagues, I put on my school board hat and I said, you know, we're talking about time changes of high schools, and so I just want to hear what you have to say about it. So we took a vote, and so I talked to every single sophomore there, so I'm saying that's 500 or 600 kids, and 95% of them voted to keep high schools starting early and getting out early. That was interesting.
Interesting.
I mean, it was 4 or 5 in each classroom that didn't, and it was 95 to 98%. So I just wanted to pass that along, and that's directly from our sophomores.
They'd probably also like to go from 10 to 2, if they could. If they could shorten it.
Yeah, I told them that was
Yeah,
not an option.
true.
I told them that was not an option, but yeah.
Are there any others, Ms.
It's
McLeod?
not a school visitor related. I just want to officially let you all know that I'm not running for re-election this year. And I just want to go ahead and bring that to your attention now. Several of you have asked me, and I just want to let you know there are other opportunities out there for me. So I'm going to, instead of campaigning, focus on those other opportunities. And so I will finish out this year.
Thank you. I want to talk about for a second. I went last week, and Ms. Riggs and Mrs. Rye also were there. We had about 7 schools from our district that attended a play at the Sandler Center, and all 7 of the schools attended the performance for free because they were funded by the Sandler Center Foundation. And for this year, so far, the Sandler Center Foundation has already awarded funding for over 5,700 students from all of our Title I schools. So those students have been able to experience a live arts performance. And last week we saw a performance called the Moon Mouse, A Space Odyssey. It was phenomenal. And our students were just they absolutely sat there and you could just tell they were so excited, but they really enjoyed it. It was just marvelous. So I just wanted to say that a lot of people don't realize that the Sandler Center does that, but I thought it was very commendable that they offer all of our Title I schools free admission for those. And so for any teachers that are listening out there, even though if you're not a Title I school, there is a slight fee, but it's definitely worth it. So get on the books for next year for all the events that are happening. So, Ms. Riggs?
Yes, and the production that they did, the company that did the Moon Mouse, there was not any speaking. There was music, but there was no speaking, and it was just, it hit on lessons of
Bullying.
bullying and science and the outer space. It was just phenomenal. And it's the same company next year that they're going to do the production for next year too. But so well worth it. It was like awesome. I mean, I was very impressed. And the kids were fantastic. So K through 6. So I do have something else to say.
Go ahead.
It's not real school related, but it is because I'm the liaison, and I might need to say more. But I wanted to tell you, I went to attended the what is it, Saturday? I just missed my mind. No,
A Red Wing.
Red Wing Park. Thank you.
Red Wing.
Help me out.
Cherry Blossom.
Cherry Blossom.
Festival.
Why did I?
Miyazaki.
Thank you. The cherry blossom. It was fantastic and very well attended. The traffic was terrible. I'm glad I got there. I had to get there early, but it was just a lot of people there. The weather was perfect, even though it was cold. The sun was out, so it was beautiful. And I just have to say, we have our junior ambassador from Tallwood Academy. She is in the 10th grade, and this girl is phenomenal. She sang from Bye Bye
Birdie.
Yeah, no, not Bye Bye Birdie, another one. By and By. I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, she was absolutely a nightingale. I've never heard a voice like hers. It was gorgeous. And everybody was like, everybody was quiet. There was a lot of people out there. But she sang for that, and she was just phenomenal. She's in the governor's school, too. So she's just Emily Myers. And just the 10th grade, so she's doing very well.
Thank you. Ms. Felton?
Chair Anderson, I'd just like to mention, I don't know if you mentioned or not, that the VBCPS official for a day breakfast was awesome.
It was.
I had an opportunity to sit with Mr. Kiever and Mr. Pohl, and they had some wonderful students that was ready to go back to be with them for a day. We were well represented in the room. Dr. Spence gave a wonderful morning address to the students, invited them to take part in administrative day. So they were all excited. It was early in the morning, and they were frying ready to go. So I can't wait to get a report from Mr. Kiever and Mr. Pohl on how the day planned. They had it all planned. I just want to know how it turned out. So I just want to mention that and thank the administration for stepping forward to doing that early in the morning and taking that time with our students to show them a day of excellence with our department. Thank you so much.
Well, our administration and our city counterparts who step up every year and join in the fun and do all kinds of fun things. I was talking to the fire chief, and he had these great pictures of our kids crawling up ladders and going through the training house and all kinds of fun stuff. So the students learn a lot about city government, and it's an excellent opportunity for them to think about ways to serve locally. So it's a good day.
Great. Any others? Okay, so moving on, we will now hear a legislative update from the 2018 General Assembly. Mr. McDonald, would you like to begin?
Sure, I don't have much to say, but to make introductions for those who need no introduction, we have Joel Andrews and Ross Grog here for Kimbler Consulting. They do great work for us during the session, and I look forward to, as I'm sure you do, their summary of what went down this session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us back. We're going to try to run through 60 days in about 20 minutes, so this will be just about the pace of the General Assembly real quick here. But as you know, I'll just start off with saying it's ongoing. the budget's not resolved, the budget's still going. They'll go back in on April 11th, which will be the start of the special session. I would not anticipate that it will be resolved on April 11th. So just because they're going back in doesn't mean that they're going to be making a whole lot of progress that day. But that's when they'll start special session. So just a quick reminder, we talked about all this back in December, but just to give you a little context and to refresh your memory, we had an election, as you know. We now have Governor Northam. The big surprise was certainly in the House, where 15 Republicans lost, closing the majority to 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. And that changed some dynamics, which we will talk about because we anticipated a change of dynamics, and that certainly played out a number of ways this session with stuff that we had seen. One of the things that is most interesting, though, is when we talk about the institutional knowledge in the General Assembly. Before, as you can see back in '98, it was really this 5 to 14 year range of how long legislators were in. Now we got nearly half of the House members who've been there for less than 5 years. And that has really also changed it because you got people coming in, not necessarily of the old regime, having new ideas, new way things should be done, and that's playing out. And on the flip side, you also, on very complicated issues such as the budget, I think you tend to give a little more authority to staff members because they're the only ones who've been around long enough to figure out how to put, big complicated budgets together, big complicated piece of legislation together, because some of these newer members, they just don't have the experience of doing that to go through. A couple of notes on the changes in leadership. We have a new speaker, Kirk Cox. The old speaker, Bill Howell, he retired. We also have the new majority leader. The minority leader stayed the same, and the new majority whip, Nick Rush, he's from Blacksburg. The other majority whip had actually lost his seats, and a lot of new committee chairs as well. And not on this slide, but just as kind of a point of reference, Barry Knight, who we all know, he's now also a budget conferee, so he is one of the few members at the end of the day who sit down and hash out the budget. He was formerly on the House Appropriations Education Subcommittee, so education is sort of part of what he is discussing over the next few months as they work on the budget. The other person is Chris Peace. He's also chairman of the General Laws Committee. He took over as chair of the Education Subcommittee on House Appropriations. So he's from Hanover, Richmond area, kind of just between here and Richmond, and he will also be one of the primary House Republicans who's negotiating the K-12 portion of the budget.
Thank you.
So we're going to go through some of the big items that are out there on the budget, and then we'll start to focus down on K-12.
So as Joel mentioned, the budget is still very much in flux. So we've put together this nice quick chart for you all that shows the governor's introduced budget. And last week, Governor Northam introduced an identical budget to what Governor McAuliffe introduced in December. So the basis of the budget negotiations is the same, which is really helpful from a process perspective. And we're hoping and anticipating that the House and Senate will adopt similar amendments when they come back on the 11th to put the budget back in conference. But really the main bullet point before we get into any of the other spending items is Medicaid expansion, and that's the difference between the House and the Senate. So the House expanded Medicaid effective January 1, 2019, but with some reforms, as they put it. So some work requirements, some other changes to both the expanded Medicaid population as well as the existing Medicaid population to help control costs. Included in that reform is the kill switch. So if the federal government match changes from 90% from the 90-10 match, it would automatically kill the expansion, which is something that some of the conservatives wanted to make sure to be fiscally prudent. Because the House expanded Medicaid, they have a lot more resources. So the House budget is better in almost every issue. So there's salary increases for state employees, for teachers, for state-supported locals. There's additional money in K-12, which I'll let Joel go into in more detail. Additional dollars in higher education, both for financial aid and base funding to institutions. There's more money for economic development. The House increased the Go Virginia money, so you've heard a lot about the Go Virginia program. So they actually increased the minimum regional grant from $500,000 to $1 million, as well as put some additional dollars in the statewide bucket, which is good for statewide economic development. They also made some significant investments in mental health. And so when looking at this chart later, so the left column is the governor's budget, which looks very similar to the House column because the governor's introduced obviously also expands Medicaid. And so it's the Senate budget that does not have quite those same levels of investment. When it comes to Hampton Roads, just a couple items. CHKD did pretty well. They got their full inflation adjustment in both the Senate and the governor's budget. Some work to do in the first year on the House budget. EVMS was fully funded in the House budget. Jefferson Lab got some additional money, and ODU got some money for a new digital shipbuilding initiative in the House budget as well. When it comes to a couple K-12 policy issues, sort of this top category of non-issues, you'll remember if we rewind a year ago, Republicans had a pretty strong control in the General Assembly, and so these issues actually got out of the committee. They actually got out of the General Assembly and were vetoed by the governor. So Virginia Virtual, the TiVo bill, and the parental choice savings account. This year is a much different story. They didn't even get out of committee in the House. So that 51-49 shift, we're really seeing some of those issues, not survive the length of the session that we'd seen in the past. Same thing, regional charter schools, that was an Ovenshing bill we've seen for the last couple of years. And then mandated full-day kindergarten, again, died in committee. Because so many of those issues we've been talking about and really working on the last couple of years didn't go anywhere, the attention was shifted to the budget and funding, school discipline, the teacher shortage was a real hot topic, as well as performance-based assessments. So with that, I'll let Joel go into more detail on each of those issues.
Yeah, so highlights of the budget so far, and I didn't include the governor stuff on here because at the end of the day, we're gonna be kind of negotiating between the House and Senate budgets anyway. But I think what is most telling, and it's all really about the Medicaid expansion, is you can see the difference between the House and Senate budgets is about $170 million for K-12. That is primarily in two different categories. One is the teacher salary increase, which the Senate eliminates fully. The House not only keeps it in the second year, they also move it up 6 months. The other thing that the House did is they put a whole lot more money into the lottery fund. This is something the House has been doing, or the General Assembly has been doing, kind of led by the House for the last couple of years, is putting unrestricted dollars into the lottery fund. They both increase it by $17.6 million, which is just lottery revenue, but the House then drops another $70 million in there, $73 million in there, which is the unrestricted funds. And this gets them to their goal that they've been talking about of 40% of lottery funds going back to the public schools with no strings attached, no match requirements, no composite index, none of that stuff goes in. The other couple things they've done, enrollment loss, there's some additional money for that if you meet a certain requirement. Primarily this is geared towards rural school divisions, mainly Southwest Virginia school divisions where they've seen significant enrollment loss, but as you all know, just because your enrollment goes down doesn't mean your cost to educate the children go down, and so they've been disproportionately impacted. A few things that they took out of the governor's budget. One is the governor had proposed, and this is the McAuliffe now Northam budget, the elementary school principals and less than 300, they gave them another slot there, that was about $7.7 million. There was money to hold harmless the LCI changes. They took all those dollars, at least the House did, they took all those dollars and dumped it into the lottery fund. The Senate just took all those dollars because they had to come up with a balanced budget and they needed to find some things. And so those are two of the bigger ticket items that they ended up taking out of direct aid to public education when in terms of how they were trying to balance their budget. Just a couple of central office things that we're kind of looking at, and you can see the Senate actually puts a little more money in the central office. The governor had put in $250,000 a year to do environmental education. Both the House and the Senate had taken that. He'd also put in about $1 million of biennium, $552,000 a year to update the licensing process. This was to make it electronic. As you know, if you've gone through the process, it is all paper and it is kind of a pain. So that was part of that. The VKRP is the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Project. The House puts in a little more money for that. eMedia, which I think hopefully all of you are familiar with, that is a program that WHRO manages. That's the online state repository. The governor had put in an additional $400,000. The House took all that out, so they left them level at $800,000. The Senate took that and they spread it over the biennium at $200,000. each year. And then both of them did a little more for PBIS, which is important. And this was on top of what the governor had done. So the House had added, roughly 2.4, and the Senate had done the 1.6 million each year. The last thing, which I want to talk about in a little more detail, is performance-based assessment, because this is one of those issues that is kind of straddling both legislative and budget issues. This came out of a piece of legislation from Senator Steve Newman, who's from Lynchburg. He chairs the the Senate Ed and Health Committee, and his bill that he had put in pretty late into session in terms of bill filing would have originally prohibited the use of any performance-based assessment for a verified credit. And what that would have done, if it had passed, would have undone all of the great changes that we saw in the SOAs that just came to fruition. All the things that we've been going towards to go towards performance-based assessment, to go towards these more comprehensive ways to measure student growth and student achievement, it would have had a dramatic impact on that. His view is he wants to make sure that all students across Virginia are being sort of measured in the same way. And if you go to performance-based assessments, specifically local performance-based assessment, it's going to be very difficult to measure how a Virginia Beach student is doing compared to a Fairfax student, a Lynchburg student is compared to a Chesapeake student. You're going to have a hard time figuring out where everyone is. And as a appropriator, he wants to sort of be able to also say, okay, we're putting X number of dollars into public education, we're getting this out. He didn't like the potential uneven playing field across the state that this might require. That was his major concern. This was a lot of concern to us and every other school division, including DOE as well, that you're really undoing a lot of the work that we had done. His bill ended up not passing and made it out of the Senate. It died in House Appropriations Subcommittee. The Senate had put in $300,000 to create a statewide performance-based assessment, because part of the compromise that was being discussed before the bill died was you can't do local performance-based assessments, but you can do a statewide performance-based assessment that would be developed by DOE. The House didn't fund it, the Senate did fund it. So I mention all of that because I think this is going to become a budget conference issue, because Steve Newman is a budget conferee. This is something he is very passionate about. So this is something that he is probably going to fight for, and I'm guessing the House killed it to help negotiate. We've already had some candid conversations with members in the House. They typically have the longstanding policy of, if a bill dies, they don't put the policy in the budget, which is something you can do because the budget overrides all legislation. That's been their policy. We've been working to make sure they try to maintain that policy. But this is something that is going to be an ongoing issue that we talk about. So it's kind of a budget issue, but it's also sort of a legislative issue. So a couple of things that we were dealing with. The big one this year was school discipline. We talked a lot about school discipline last year. Last year we had 3 or 4 different school discipline bills. This year we only had 2 that we were dealing with. One was prohibiting suspension of grades pre-K through 3 for more than 3 days. That's what the original bill would have done. That's what the House bill had done, but it died in the House. It didn't make out in the Senate. There was a compromise worked out in the Senate that said you can suspend up to 3 days with the exception of drugs, firearms, certain criminal acts, and then this sort of blanket, which we'll talk about here in a second with the other one, aggravating circumstances as defined by DOE. So it gives you a lot more leverage, and DOE is going to come up with another list of aggravating circumstances that we'll be working with them on, of trying to make sure that we have the flexibility to deal with students appropriately. I'll tell you that one of the things that was most interesting and influential on this is one of the lobbyists, I can't remember which school division, brought in a photo to committee of what a 3rd grader had done to a classroom. And it was desks kicked over, it was bookshelves on the ground, it was, it was a real mess, and saying this is the things that we are dealing with in our classrooms. We need to have appropriate ways to deal with these students that is appropriate to the behavior. And so that was one of the things I think was influential. Long-term suspension, same bill that we saw last year. It reduces to 45 days with a few exceptions. You can go beyond it if the offense involves weapons, drugs, or severe bodily injury, as well as aggravating circumstances as defined by DOE, which they haven't yet defined yet. So I would expect the governor to sign both of those, and we'll be working with DOE to help define those. And I would say this doesn't touch expulsion, so we're only talking about long-term suspension for that one. Teacher shortage. This was another, big issue this year. Here's just 3 of the things that happened this year. One is Armed Services Teacher Reciprocity. This is for spouse of any active duty member of the Armed Services comes in, they get reciprocity. One is for the Board of Ed to promulgate regulations to go from a 5-year teaching program to a 4-year one. This came out of an executive director from the previous administration, but unfortunately it expired the day that the North administration came into office. So this legislation keeps that process moving through the Board of Ed. And then there were pretty significant reforms to the teacher licensure process. What this is designed to do is really to get more control back to local school division, give you all the ability to say, we want to hire this person, don't want to hire this person, as opposed to having much stricter standards at the state level that may not be meeting the needs of the local school division. One of the parts that was most controversial about this bill was the CTE component. There was a lot of discussion about the 4,000 hour requirement versus a biannual or annual waiver by the Department of Ed. And that was the most controversial part when it comes to people who are, they're working in a trade, they retire after so many years, want to come back to the school division and teach, or go to the school division and teach. That was the most controversial part of this bill. They end up compromising by leaving the 4,000 hour requirement in, but allowing for the Department of Ed to waive the review for 2 years instead of just 1 year. And then next, a few other bills I'm just going to highlight. I'm not going to go through all these because I know we're short on time. There are some issues about student privacy that kind of go from an opt-out to an opt-in process. Dual enrollment, this came out of the JLARC report. There's 2 things that it does. One is it tries to create more universal standards across the state in terms of quality. This was one of the complaints from 4-year institutions of why they do not always accept a dual enrollment course, because they say dual enrollment courses and quality vary dramatically across the state. So this is trying to do more unified on that front, but it also requires that they come up with a process to award credit more uniformly, because as you know, just because you take a dual enrollment course doesn't mean you're getting quality credit for that. That's in line with what they've done with AP over the last couple of years. Military enrollment, this started as a requirement to have open enrollment policies for military students. It was amended. We worked with the patron on this to say you just have to have a policy on open enrollment, but it's up to the school board to decide what that policy would be. I think we already have a policy in place on this stuff, so it shouldn't have much of an impact on us. Tax credits for apprenticeships. This is kind of I think an interesting and good concept of creating tax credits for companies who get apprenticeships, trying to incentivize companies to work with school divisions to create more of those opportunities for students. Virtual Virginia, a couple bills on that end up really just kind of clarifying current practice, primarily dealing with homeschool students. Homeschool students are already allowed to take virtual Virginia courses. Advertising on buses. This would have been, I think, kind of funny to see, buses going down the highway with ads on them. It didn't make it out of the Senate, unfortunately. It didn't make it out of the House. There was a bill, this was put in by Jason Yares, that would have created a testing fund pool that people could put money in to help offset the cost of the AP test. One of the things, as you know, that we see is some students, if they don't think they can afford the test, they won't even bother enrolling in the course. So this would have done that. Unfortunately, the House has a policy of if they're not going to put money behind it, they're not going to pass the legislation. They kind of feel like they're going to do it all at one time. And then electronic textbooks, something we've been dealing with for a couple of years of, the requirements of if you do anything electronically on a textbook, you have to give every single student an electronic resource. This has kind of bounced back and forth between a couple of different proposals. We have seen it go as far as guaranteeing internet connectivity at home. This bill did not do it this year, but would have required pretty significant connectivity in the school division. Fairfax in particular, it was 100 kilobits per second. Fairfax in particular was concerned because there is not a pipeline big enough for their 150,000 students to even get that type of connectivity. The bill didn't make it out of the House, so it's something we'll continue to see of how do you balance, and really I think the discussion is a good one because it's how do you balance moving towards the digital world, making sure that students have all the resources that they need.
One other topic that obviously has been in the news a lot is school safety. So Speaker Cox has set up what he calls a select committee on school safety. It's the first time in 150 plus years the House of Delegates has set up a select committee. The select committees are reserved for topics of significance that cross the jurisdiction of the standing committees. And what is most interesting is we've seen a lot in the past of joint subcommittees between the House and the Senate. This is just a House Select Committee on school safety. Just as interesting as what they plan on talking about is what they plan on not talking about. So they're going to avoid behavioral health issues and let the Deeds Commission focus on those. They're going to avoid higher education and just stick to K-12. And they also do not plan to talk about gun control or guns.
I'm sorry, one other thing I'll just mention on this, because they're going to be talking about behavioral health resources, I think there will be an opportunity through the select committee to talk about the support cap that went in place 8 years or so ago that keeps getting, the divide on that keeps growing. I think there's an opportunity to say, we need to do something about that because some of those behavioral protocols and prevention protocols could be addressed through that support cap. So
I know we are out of time. Just a few other highlights. Obviously, there was a lot of other legislation, electronic grid modernization or the Dominion legislation, larceny threshold. We've raised the larceny threshold from $200 to $500. Lots of natural gas pipeline bills, as well as bills to fully fund WMATA and some of the reforms they need up there. Regionally in Hampton Roads, we did get a gas tax floor, which is really great for transportation infrastructure. There is money in both budgets for port dredging, hoping that there will be some additional. As well, Chris Stolle had a bill to create a chief resiliency officer, which is also important from a resiliency perspective for the region. So he's been trying to do that for a couple of years. So nice that finally happened. Really important. We really need to make sure we update our curriculum for our new state salamander.
we do.
The red salamander is the new state salamander. So
There's so many important pieces of legislation.
really important stuff we dealt with. There was an attempt to do a state grape, but that failed in the Senate.
Oh my God.
But this is our new state salamander, so we
Oh
hope
my
you all
gosh.
will get right on
More
updating
animals.
the biology curriculum to
I guess
take care
red's
of that.
It's great.
A few other things that I will just skip over since I believe we're out of time. As you all are well aware, there are some elections in June and again in November. We just highlight some of the federal candidates, and interesting on the House side, those races at the bottom, those are seats currently held by Republicans that Ralph Northam either won or lost by less than 4%. So obviously he won in Taylor and Comstock, and then he lost Bratz district by 3.7%. So should be an interesting November. In addition to that, on the state level, there are some pending redistricting cases. The first one, Bethune-Hill, deals with has been sent back down from the U.S. Supreme Court to the U.S. District Court for another view. Apparently, the first 3-judge panel did not use the correct legal criteria when determining whether race was considered when the districts were drawn back in 2011. So that one is sort of pending on the federal track. Then on the state track, back the 1st of March, oral arguments were heard in the second case, and that one is dealing with how contiguous or compact our districts were. And so that's the case that you probably heard a lot about that's being pushed by One Virginia 2021, which is an advocacy group for gerrymandering. The only reason why I bring these up is depending on the outcome of these cases, members of the House of Delegates may have to run again this November, which would be really fun for this election cycle. And then for them, because they just finished running in 17, would run again in 18, and then have to run again in 19. So
They would run 3 years in a row.
3 years in a row. So just something to be aware of. They are obviously still through the process, and there's no determination yet, but it is in the back of everyone's mind. So with that, any questions?
Do we have any questions?
That's a lot of money.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
Those You talked about the lottery funds were unrestricted funds.
Mhm.
Would that also mean you could give a pay raise for teachers out of those funds?
You can. When they first actually put in the lottery fund, there was a requirement that said 50% have to be for one time, 50% can be for reoccurring costs. They took out that requirement, I think this a year ago, and said 100% of those funds can be used for whatever you want to use it for. So there's no requirements on those funds. I think for us, and I'm looking at Farrell to make sure I get my number right, I think it's about $2 million a year is what we get out of those. Is that my
That would
he's keeping the nod, so I think that's about right, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Edwards?
Well, are those considered budget-based recurring resources though?
That's it.
It is.
Which would make it one time.
They-
I mean,
Yes,
if
yes,
they're
but
not,
subject to
there,
change.
there's an inherent danger in,
Correct.
yeah.
The concern that we've always had with lottery funds is it is great that we get them and we have been getting them, and I think there is intent that we will continue to get them. There is always the concern that it is a big pot of money that can, when budget times get tough, which eventually they will get tough again, that is an easy pot of money to redirect in other ways.
So it'd be wise
So
to use
it's
it for
not
one
built in
time.
like, re-benchmarking and
Right,
other things
right.
are built in, so.
We've heard a lot from House leadership that they are trying more, they understand that there are a lot of limitations because we are a Dillon Rule state, and that they are trying really hard to use mechanisms like unrestricted lottery funds to give localities a bit more leeway in what they do with those dollars.
But your concern
Valid.
is exactly right, yeah.
Ms. Melnick?
Do you know what that dollar amount is, the 40%?
$594 million, something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it, somewhere in there, upper 500s.
Give or take $1 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
Budget dust.
That's nice.
Any other questions for legislative? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is an update from the Policy Review Committee on class rank.
Ooh, here come the color folders.
Please the trees.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to review it, but I can't get logged onto the website.
Very rainbowy.
Hey, I'm trying to pick what color I want.
That was on the top.
I roll
I
so
know.
hard.
It was pretty.
Unbeknownst to you, this is a personality test in terms of the type of folder you're selecting. Oh, I should have waited till everybody's selected before I said that, I'm sorry.
Messed up.
Not UVA Clemson.
Now you have a control group and experimental group.
I'm not picking orange as a good Gamecock mother.
Rick, can you get started?
Yes, sir.
It's appropriate that the slide from the last presentation that says questions is on the board. When we got together in our last workshop, there was some discussion about bringing forward back to this workshop some policy recommended language. And so the PRC met about 10 days or so ago. And what you have in front of you are two policies and the recommended changes that were presented to PRC. And I'll start with policy 672. Policy 672 currently addresses student evaluation, grading, and class rank. And as we looked at both 672 and then policy 529, the thought process in PRC was that we take the current language in 672 around class rank, move that to 529, and address what the board has asked us to do in terms of bringing forward changes to class rank. So the information that you see in 672 is really striking references to class rank. Then as you transition from 672 to 529, which should be the second handout in your folder, we have made a slight change on 529 under C, item 2, and that slight change is related to the current and what has been a fairly long-standing practice at the state level in terms of awarding the governor's seal on the diploma. Our policy is not matched what is the policy at the state level. Our practice here has been to match that. So we are revising the language in C2 to meet the requirements of VDOE and to ensure that our language is aligned. So that is a change. It's not necessarily a change that we had talked about as a group. It is a change we brought forward to PRC and wanted to make you aware of that. Item letter E is an addition to 529 that pulls in the language from policy 672 and lays out our current process for utilizing class rank. We do note in item E that that would be in effect through the graduating class of 2021. And then if you move down to letter F is the information that we would be proposing as, again, new information with regard to honors designations. That information there incorporates language from the policy that is in Fairfax County, one that they've used for 10 years around class rank, and then lays out the different ranges for our honors designations. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Weems?
Okay, so the FC, the grade point average will be computed for the following purposes. C, communication to college admission offices and other agencies designated by the student and or parent. So a student may go to the guidance office, and what is other agencies, first of all? And if the student goes or parent calls and said, I want this for such and such person, are they getting a class rank or always a percentile? Which,
This is GPA.
I mean, yeah, is it, oh, the GPA, so
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
the GPA. Well, what if they want to get, again, the class rank?
We would,
I mean, I understand for military and colleges that have it, so do they just request and then you send it straight to VMI or whatever is requesting it, and does the parent then get to know what you've sent?
so there are a couple of layers to that question. So the process would include a percentile rating, and if you'll go back up to the first paragraph, that's where we attempt to address how that may be communicated. So, for instance, in talking with Fairfax County about the process that they utilize, they will provide the grade point in those designations for military academies, as an example. They will provide the grade point average. They will provide the top grade point average for that particular class at that particular school. And then they will provide the percentile rating for where that student falls based on their grade point average.
And is that done according to the Latin that would change it to, or is it by every 10%? I mean, how is that percentile? How's that done?
It's based on the grade point average. So the Latin designation doesn't have an
Anything to do with
Okay, give me an example of a.
This child would be in the top 5%.
Okay,
This
so-
child would be in the top 10%.
10%. I mean, so it goes every like 5% or 10% or 20% or what?
It could go in whatever percentage we deem. I mean, for instance, it could be the top. You're in the top 2%.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, so if I'm a parent or student and I still just want to know personally my class rank, there's no way you can get that.
We will not be providing the class rank.
Okay.
According to this policy.
According to this policy, to anybody.
That is the proposal. Yes, ma'am.
Have you, okay, I'll get that in a second, but have you contacted any other school divisions that are already doing this? To find out how this has affected their, for example, college applications, that type of thing? Have you called any other school divisions?
In the similar conversation with Fairfax County yesterday, we talked at length about their shift in policy. And we began the conversation with the person saying, we've been doing this for so long, we don't know of any issues that have occurred. They've done it for 10 years. And so my question was, are students still attending college from Fairfax County? And she said, absolutely. In fact, they're attending multiple colleges and universities. And they have not seen an issue with college acceptance. They haven't seen an issue with scholarship acceptance. And the person that I spoke with felt as though they were able to make the transition with relative ease.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Holtz.
You have here in number 3, you're doing away with the valedictorian and salutatorian. So are there going to be any students speaking at the graduation, and how do you choose that?
Yes, ma'am. Well, one of the things that in making this recommendation, this was something that I believe the PRC felt ought to be included in the recommendation with regard to valedictorian and salutatorian. We took that forward. When we talked in the last workshop, we talked a little bit about a consistent process across schools to recognize students to speak, and frankly, we would begin that process with the incoming class of 2022, meaning as they become freshmen next year, the high school principals would work individually at their schools and then collectively as a group to determine who would be speaking at graduation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Manning.
How are we currently reporting class rank for military academies? Do we say the student placed 6 out of 600, or are we giving them a percentile right now?
Well, right now, we're still utilizing class rank.
So we'll not percentile. They are ranked 6th out of 600.
Dr. Green?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Okay. Have you spoken with the U.S. Military Academy, U.S. Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, and asked them what they prefer to have?
I have not spoken with them.
Okay, I think that's something that's really important that we look into. We need to make sure that we're setting our students up for what they need, and if we don't know.
Sure, and if I could just add that in my conversation with Fairfax County,
Yes, that's what I was
I'll go back to the conversation around the percentile rating and the fact that Fairfax County feels very comfortable with the process that they utilize and do have students that go to the Naval Academy, they go to West Point, they go to the Air Force Academy, etc. So the process they use to indicate the percentile rating has not hindered their ability to have students participate in those service academies.
I still think it's important for us to call them and talk with them about that.
Understand?
So 2 things that the community stated that they wanted from that survey that we received was that they still wanted class rank to be made available upon request, and that they really felt that valedictorian and salutatorian should be kept. And I feel very strongly that we need to add that back in. How we do the request for the class rankings, I'm open to how we might do that, but I think that we should still make that available to students who want it and who feel that that's important for them to use.
Why?
Because as we heard in the last, a couple of reasons. As we heard in the last workshop, 55% of universities, I believe, state that they still use class rank. And so I think it's important to still make that available. And I think valedictorian and salutatorian are very important. I mean, these kids work very hard for that. It's a recognition thing, and colleges still have it. I mean, I don't understand why we're getting rid of it.
Ms. Melnick. Thank you, Ms. Manning.
I think okay, so page 2 here, when we talk about how our honor grads are going to be honored, actually, you go to graduation now, anybody with a 3.0 or higher is an honor grad, and the fact that this is going to offer that distinction, I think is really important. So 3.0 until 3.5, 3.5 to 3 point something, and on up. I like that distinction much better than everybody being graded as just an honor grad.
Yeah.
Mr. Edwards.
I've had an opportunity to discuss this with a number of different groups and people, and the only pushback I've gotten is, why do we have to wait until the incoming class? I mean, because they say, they're a little bit distraught that we're not doing it sooner than the incoming freshman next year. And I explained to him, I said, I kind of agree with you, but we really don't want to change the rules of the game for, in the middle of the game for those that started their freshman year and are already have already been out there achieving and doing things in high school. So I certainly support doing it, but I just wanted to share that I've heard once I've had the opportunity to explain what we're doing, and actually the pilot article, not the column, but the article, I thought did a very good, fair, balanced job of explaining it. So it's been very helpful.
Mrs. Weems?
Yeah, I mean, I like the breakup too, that it's not just 3.0 and above. I mean, that's a huge range. So I do like that. And I don't really, this is not one of my like so passionate things that I just really have to just like lose sleep over. So I don't really care too much either way. But I have talked to folks, and most folks that I've talked to don't really care too much either, except for they do, and I've asked them specifically about valedictorian. Should we still have that, or should we just let the schools vote on it, or come up with something else? And I have heard that it's, they still say, and this is teachers and parents, that, and again, I can't relate to this group of just such high achievers, and I just applaud them for it, but they still say that motivates a lot to be top from their class. And they said they would hate for it to be a popularity contest, that you're gonna, although I'm sure that you were the best speaker.
Unpopular people.
Well, I'm just saying, whether the teachers vote for it or however, I mean, I don't even know how you're gonna get a consistent, I don't know how you're gonna come up with a consistent fair way for every school to pick their valedictorian. So I'm a little, like, I would still kind of like, I mean, it's just factual. The top grade point average is the valedictorian, and there's no arguing about it. But then, I mean, people that are against this, are you still thinking there's going to be those 10 or 20 or 30 kids that are just going to be constantly on the calculator figuring out the grade point average to see if they themselves are doing it? But again, is that negative or positive? I don't know. If it motivates them to get the top of their school, yeah, I still think about it. I still think that
we'd be discussing it. That was my question.
Well, of how schools will discuss how they're going to do it, but I still think valedictorian. Do they still have valedictorians in colleges? I haven't been to a graduation in like 3 years. I'm assuming they still have it at colleges. Valedictorians.
Do you remember who your college valedictorian was? No, you probably didn't even meet him.
No, but that valedictorian does, and he or she worked really hard to get that.
My C grades are getting doing better.
Mrs. Manning?
I like
I'm sorry.
valedictorians based on the top in the class, academically.
Thank you, Ms. Weems. Mrs.
So
Manning?
I agree with you, Ms. Melnick. I do like the different levels. I really do. I think that's important, and I want to move forward with that. Some feedback that I've gotten from the community. I think Mr. Edwards and I are obviously talking to different people because I've gotten a completely different take. A majority of people feel that 55% of our students receiving honors and above, it just waters it down. That's the feedback that I've gotten. And we had 2 students that brought us these issues last year, Ben Purvis and Connor Hetman. And I've not been able to contact Ben about how he feels about the proposal, but I will. But we all received a message from Connor, who he felt the same thing about the 55% receiving the honors and above. He felt that we should raise that lower level up. I believe he suggested 3.2, if I'm not mistaken. And a suggestion that I have for valedictorian and salutatorian is let's still take, say, the top 10 students by GPA and let them interview for the position of valedictorian and salutatorian. Have a full resume, have a blind panel choose who that would be, so that we still have them, but we're kind of looking a little more than at just the grades. So those are the suggestions that I have.
Ms. Melnick?
For me, it's just important for me to keep telling myself that Virginia Beach is not spearheading this effort. This is not, this is nationwide. And this isn't, we're just not coming up with this on our own. This is an important shift, and as with any change, I mean, we don't know anything different. I don't think anyone in this room knows anything different than a number 1 and a number 2 in their class. But it doesn't mean that it has to remain that way forever. I mean, we're not alone, and I ask you to keep referencing a district that's close, that's doing this, that has been doing this for the past 10 years and has had great success. And I think the important thing to note is that you said Fairfax doesn't even remember almost a time before this, and that's important.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. Ms. Manning, I appreciate your additional comments on valedictorian, salutatorian, but my question was going to be, how do we do it otherwise? And I think that's a discussion on the table that would be interesting to have. We could theoretically surprise students and say, hey, the idea is not to create a competition on the calculator for the GPA and just have them do their work and do well, and whatever happens, happens, which is, I think, part of the reason why we're discussing going to this system. But if at the end of the day, it's like, well, congratulations, you're in the top spot, maybe that's acceptable. I'm just throwing out ideas. I can see Mrs. Weems wincing over there. I don't.
I mean, competition is everything in the world is competitive.
I agree, but
everything.
But I'm not entirely sure if academic achievement is. We want great academic achievement. I'm not sure if that's a requirement. The idea behind the interviews is an interesting one. I don't know if I missed it, Mr. Kiever. What does Fairfax just not do valedictorian, salutatorian at all?
Correct.
Okay. What do they do for student speakers for their graduations? Did you get any sense from those conversations?
School based. They make a determination at the school.
Do the students decide, or is that a?
It happens differently in each of their 36 different high schools. What we would like to work on in terms of consistency is a process that we would utilize both individually and then collectively to determine how that would be handled in Virginia Beach. But we're not recommending that be a part of the policy or regulation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm fully on board with removing valedictorian, salutatorian. If we're using the strict definition of class rank, maybe that's just if we do any of this, that just goes along with it. But I'm open to further discussion on that.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson, can I make a comment just about undergraduate status?
Absolutely.
And it kind of goes to what Ms. Manning was mentioning with regard to a percentage being too high for undergraduates. And I would just want to put back out there that undergraduate really wasn't on the table for us in terms of a discussion at the principal level. That we felt like a 3.0 is appropriate designation for undergraduate, and the data that we've shared, 54% of the students in the class of 2016 were undergraduates, and then 56% in the class of 2017. We feel like that's an indication of at least B work over the course of 4 years in high school, and don't feel like that's inappropriate to suggest it's undergrad status. And while I understand the student's perspective, we're not suggesting that we lower that standard or actually raise that standard.
Well, I also think there was some comparisons drawn. I don't know if it was him where that was or in the column in the paper. I can't remember. But somewhere there was a comparison drawn to like ODU's percentage of undergraduates. And I just want to also be sure that that's an apples to apples comparison. ODU doesn't have a sort of lower than Latin honors set of designations. So if you were comparing apples to apples, you'd start with where would our 3.5 students in higher be as a percentage compared to like an ODU or whatever. And they're roughly the same, 25%-ish, I think. 3.5 and higher, I think I saw it was a little over 25% for us.
That's accurate.
Mrs. Rye?
So it's more, I did want to ask, because when we mention the term valedictorian, it means different things to different people, and there's different definitions. It's the more common use traditionally in our country, it's been the top achieving student. But if you look up the technical definition, it's who speaks at it's the who gives the valedictory address. I would argue because of our cultural understanding of the term that we shouldn't use it for moving forward for the graduation speaker. They're two different subjects, and that's the one comment I wanted to make. And I mean, I just think to be consistent, if we're going rankless, it means going rankless, and it's hard to wean ourselves from things. I mean, I'm from a family of two valedictorians, and yet I think I'm the first who likes to compromise with issues, but ranking and unranking, I don't think there's really any middle ground. You either have to go for it all the way and then give serious thought moving forward to the speakers, and I think that our schools and our division can do that. Those are my comments.
Ms. McLeod and then Ms. Riggs.
Thank you. I am not a person who believes in participation trophies, except for I just ran my first 8K and got my own. And I really am happy about the medal.
See?
But yeah, it's right. But
To finish
it
your medal.
was a finisher medal,
Right.
exactly.
Finisher trophy.
Which is very much like the diploma you're handed that the children leave under their beds to collect dust and ask me how I know that. Okay, so but let's go back to a couple of concerns. First off, right now we honor our students who have a 3.0. We're not changing any of that. And the fact that we already have 55% of our kids accomplishing that is something to be very proud of.
Yes.
Yep.
It just flat out should. So breaking these down actually does something a little nicer for those instead of just anyone with a 3.0 and saying that with honors, that means anybody with 3.0. This is actually giving those people who need that extra pat on the back because they got a 3.5 to say, I did a little better than just honors. And this person is a little, yeah, exactly. But the fact that I think we shouldn't get fixated on the number of students because they are already being recognized as honor students when they're graduating and they go across the stage with honors means they got a 3.0 or higher. So they're already being acknowledged. And in order, the other way for them to do just that little extra bit is if they want to be a National Honor Society, they have to have a 3.2. So there's that extra little bit that way. So I think it's very nice that it breaks that part down. I really appreciate, Carolyn, that you took the time actually to look up the word valedictorian.
Yeah, that
I mean,
was
none of
good.
us,
Yeah.
nobody else thought to do that. And I think that was because we all have different interpretations of what that means. I don't think that this dummies it down in any way. I will agree that if we're going to do away with class rank, we do away with class rank, and that's what it means. There is no announcing what 1 and 2 is, that we just do away with it. And I also trust that the schools can come up with a way to determine what would be best for the speakers. And and it's not to bash any of our former speakers, but there are some unbelievably talented students who are able to speak, and just because they didn't get a 5.17 doesn't mean that they shouldn't have that opportunity to address and give an amazing message to those students whom they're graduating with. And I feel confident that that the schools can, with a nice panel of people, can determine who would represent their class best. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Ms. Riggs?
You just said everything I wanted to say, but you said it nicely, and I did want to comment on what Carolyn said. I think that taking the time and presenting it the way you did really makes a difference. And just given the exact definition of valedictorian, salutatorian, and I think, you're speaking from experience of coming from a family of that and being able to say, all right, if we're going to do this, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel. I think that if we're going to do it, let's go all the way and let's do it. I think the people I've heard the loudest about this are the traditional folks. My husband's one of them. I can't believe you're doing away with this. And I'm like, you don't even get the whole thing. Have you been listening to the school board conversations and meetings? I asked you to listen. But so you can hear, what's going on and how things have changed. It's not that way anymore. It's a change. It's what we need to move forward in. And I'm like you guys. I don't think everybody deserves a trophy either. I think that's
I had a hard time with that at different times when I started. I disagree with that. But I think that this is not doing that at all. And I love the way it's described and it's broken down. I think that is just, to me, it gives them more distinction.
Right. So I've been the one who has been answering emails in the last week or so, and so the way I've been describing it to people is exactly what you said, Mrs. Riggs. And absolutely, I feel like this absolutely distinguishes the difference in how we honor our students and how we give them accolades. And Mrs. McLeod, 100%, I am behind you with exactly what you said. You said it exactly the way I wish I could have said it. But I'm with you 100%. I'm with you there. Mrs. Felton, you are next.
Thank you. Mrs. McLeod, I'm behind you also 100%. I don't know if I know this because I've gone to all the graduations or not, but I just like to say that they are honored in the program by the sashes they wear, by the cords they wear, from the nurses' graduation on down to the GED programs, to the summer programs. They're all honored. And I like the idea that this administration has stepped out and even made the Renaissance educational graduation a little bit more elaborate, a little more light and fair way. I like to say that as well. I sit on 2 committees other than this board. I sit on the Park and Rec Commission as well, which is served by the NYLA, the Mayor's Youth Leaders Association, and I also sit on the Virginia Beach Historic Preservation, which they also have another student team group there as well. And quite a few of those sit on the Honor Society. And what I've asked them about the valedictorian and the salutatorian, how do they feel about it? They said, well, really, and I like what Mr. Keeper said as well, it would be in the hands of the school. They said, we like to vote on it. We vote on our class president. And the class president knows almost everything about all of the students, all of the organization, the spirit of the school, what we feel, and they speak adamantly to what we are, admirably to what we are. So they're saying if we could vote, like we vote for our class president to speak for us, that is what we mostly look forward to, having the class president, or we vote that person in to do that. And I just said, and I've talked with them substantially, these students, and they speak well to what they believe in and what they feel. And I think they're the ones that we can listen to as well as our students sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Felton. Ms. Weems?
I mean, just what you said, Ms. McLeod, and we just need to remember as we move forward, I mean, there might be some great speakers, and I'm sure there are great speakers in our schools. There are great talent, everything. But on the other hand, if you're a student that may not be involved with tons of stuff except for your academic success, and you have a 5.3, that really shouldn't disqualify you from speaking because maybe they, maybe they're not the talented speaker, but they are a darn good student and proved it. So at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not being unfair to somebody like that.
But they can still audition.
Well, they can audition to see if they speak well, have good public speaking skills. Yes. I still don't know how to do that. Again, it's not a big deal to me, but I just,
Dr. Spence, do you have something to add to this?
Couple thoughts. First, it's been I just want to tell the board how much I appreciate this dialogue. It's been very interesting, I think, to listen to, and well thought through. Very quickly, as an aside, my industrious staff has pointed out that they went on the Naval Academy website here in the last few minutes, and that the Naval Academy website actually specifically states if your school does not provide class rank, provide a percentile in performance of your peers.
Yay.
That said, so I was a high school principal for about 8 years. And, during that time, so I'm saying this from my perspective as a high school principal because I also want to reinforce that a lot of this came to you from our high school principals, having worked with their staffs to talk about this. And 2 things that I just want to say. Number one, I know high school people really well. High school people do not hand out trophies. Anything that a kid gets in high school is earned. And in terms of grades and GPAs, that's if they're the least likely people on the planet to inflate grades. I'm just going to tell you that right now. I like the designation. So this is not just me talking from that perspective. I like these designations, similar to some of the things that you said. It is an opportunity. I mean, if a student is designated as magna cum laude, they have earned a 3.76. That's outstanding work in a high school environment. And that's worthy of distinction. And it isn't participation to get to 3.76. That is a distinction. That is an honor that I think this system reflects our recognition of that. And I think that's great. So I think the unfortunate soundbite about trophies and participation, I think it's thrown around way too often in terms of the work that we do and doesn't reflect the professionalism of our teachers and their ability to think about what their students deserve to have earned in their classes. And I also don't think it reflects the level of work that it takes in this instance to get to these honors designations. And so I want to reiterate that I think I'm representing the thinking of our high school folks when I say that. The other part, I just want to reflect on my own experiences in a different county as a high school principal where it was a school-based decision on who spoke, and it varied widely. Some were valedictorian, salutatorian, others were not. I happened to be principal in a high school that did not have the valedictorian and salutatorian speaking because our school community decided that we wanted to value and honor other things. They had the opportunity to speak if they were selected, but they went through a number of ways of thinking about that, and so you had to write a speech for starters that then was vetted by a group of teachers to figure out if you had written a good speech that would speak to the community and spirit of the school. And then those students had the opportunity to be selected based on that and other criteria. And I'm not saying that's the way. Actually, the reason I'm saying that is because I believe our schools, the professionals in our schools, the principals and the teachers in our schools, working with Mr. Kiever and his support, will not have difficulty, as Mrs. Rye said earlier, coming up with a system that I think puts in front of people, if the question is who's going to speak at graduation, people who represent our schools well. And I think that we ought to be able to trust that our principals and teachers can come up with those systems. And so that I just offer as my perspective as a former high school principal.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this?
Can I just, Mr. Kiever, did you say, so this is, with all the principals, this is unanimous, this what you just gave us today?
Well,
Pretty much, or?
the designation, sure. Now, I didn't share the policy review committee information. I wanted to give it to you guys first to have dialogue. I'll send it to them almost immediately upon finishing, but they are unanimous behind their support for the Latin honor designations.
Okay, so when you submit that process, when you add everything, will we be able to, can you send us some feedback on that?
I can. I mean, I think, Dr. LeBlanc is here again this evening. I think it's great that she's here again. Clearly at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, she'd like to be with us.
I mean, I'd like to just see what the principals say about this last bit that they haven't seen yet about.
Oh, the Val-Sal?
Yeah.
Oh, no, we've talked about that.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so they're
Well,
all,
I thought your question was related to have they read the actual policy language?
the valedictorian and salutatorian bit
They are 100% in support
of letting it be site-based. And
No.
Going away with it.
of not utilizing those
Not using that,
designations.
and then let
Correct.
the school decide who is going to speak and how and who.
Well,
and what.
creating a system
A
that's
system.
consistent across all
Okay,
schools.
okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I knew what the principals are thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That it? Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a healthy discussion. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is the quarterly forecast for the school board agenda topics for the next quarter.
It is, thanks. And just by way of reminder, relative to the last conversation, we will be bringing that for information at the next board. All right. Passing this out, and it'll be up on the screen as well. This is the Q4 forecast for your enjoyment. Just as a reminder, this is an opportunity to guide the discussions of our workshops. We, as a senior leadership team, do try to capture what we think we've heard as pertinent topics for discussion and what we believe. We'd like you to also hear from in terms of our work, but this is your chance to weigh in. I do want to point out a couple of things. The VSBA legislative positions proposal, I think at the request of the legislative committee that we added that to a workshop for the second meeting in April. That is to meet a deadline for the VSBA legislative platform from Virginia Beach. It's a May deadline.
The deadline is actually the 11th, so that's why we needed to move approval to the 22nd, and we hope to have something for you to look at on the May 8th.
The 24th, you mean?
Yeah.
What is the 22nd?
May 22nd is our
Oh,
board
okay.
meeting. That's when we need to vote on the proposals.
Okay.
And we do have a couple we're talking about, so we'll have more on that later.
Okay.
So this is, again, this is just for you to review. As you know, these move, but we do try to stick with these for planning purposes. Any questions that you have, things you think we've missed, things you are wondering about? And then if you have questions that come up after tonight and you're digesting this, please feel free to pick up the phone and give me a call. Happy to talk about it.
Right. So I know a couple of people have mentioned topics that they'd like to have workshops on. And so double check and look and see if any of those topics are on here, if you've mentioned those already. If not, let us know.
When are we, it may still be during this quarter, doing the technology?
Yeah.
That's
It's
what
on
I was
April
thinking.
10th. April
Yeah.
10th.
Under the workshops.
Oh, and in workshop. Sorry, I'm looking at our information. That's why I'm not seeing it.
That's okay, no
Okay,
problem.
thank
Under
you.
workshops, yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? I know that was a big one.
Ms. Holtz?
For the past 2 years, the governor has designated the last week or 2 weeks in April as voter registration for high school students. And we have always read a proclamation. I'm expecting we'll get the same thing this year. Does that factor into this?
If we see that, we haven't seen it yet, we would add it under resolutions, probably on the 424 docket there for action.
Okay.
actually seen the draft already.
Have you seen it? Okay. I'll just make a note so we catch it.
Okay. Any others? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So for the first time in I don't know how many weeks, we do not have a closed session scheduled this evening. And we are actually finishing up this workshop extremely early
11
for
minutes
us. So, but we will recess and reconvene in the boardroom at 6 o'clock.
Thank
So
you.
Mr. Fraser,